So another question kind of along the lines of thinking about children. There's some parents on Twitter who wanted to ask, what are your thoughts or general perhaps advice for them on how they can pick for themselves if they want to homeschool their kids, if they should take their kids to private school, and regardless, like what type of social skills do you think they should be focused on helping their kids develop? And also, you actually already answered it, but they wanted to know what you would like to educate your kids on. So I think that the missing aspect here is social development with like homeschool or private school.
Yeah, I reject this whole social development thing. I know it's gotten very popular, but I think humans are social machines, and these days we're over socialized, not under socialized. We have Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Clubhouse, Twitter, Facebook. We have unlimited ways to socialize virtually. Lots of kids I see are socializing in real life, if they're not socializing virtually. I would argue that socialization creates far more problems than it solves, and that the modern individual is over socialized. Exceptional people are built in solitude. That's not popular to hear, but it's true. It's the alone time that you spent when you were a kid that made you good at whatever you are. It wasn't the group time. The group time was spent having too much fun. Most likely, there are a few exceptions, but not many. Um, so I would say in general, socialization is actually the problem that you're trying to avoid as opposed to the asset that you're trying to bring into it. And I think it's kind of pathetic how quickly we fall into saying, well, schools for socialization. And gee, what about socialization? We've abdicated on this idea that it's the best way to educate your child, because clearly it's not true. It's a combination of one size fits all education, compliance training, daycare, and and I would argue socialization, and the worst kinds of socialization in false little Lord of the Flies type worlds where people are very hierarchical. Who's the prom queen? Who's the football player? Who's the jock? Who's popular? Who's cool? Who's doing drugs? Who's not? All that stuff is nonsense. I mean, the further you get in life, the more of an adult you become, the more you get away from that. And we all remember that shock when we shifted from school to the real world. What a tremendous difference it was. And we'd just been in a little bubble for in our lives up until that point. So I would argue, and I don't care about, sure, people may ask me for citations, but there is plenty of evidence that homeschool kids do a lot better than even private school kids or public school kids. There's even evidence that unschooled kids who were basically just left alone with no education, tend to be at worst one grade behind uh, schooled kids. And then when they get to college, they actually catch up completely because they're interested. Think about that. All the time you spent in school, K through 12, really amounted to being 1 year ahead of a kid who didn't go to school at all. And then in college, that kid caught up right away because now they were genuinely interested. So I think the way we do schooling is much more about daycare, and it's also preparing kids for the wrong things. I mean, 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day in a little group prison camp where you have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom, and they tell you how to think and how to behave. I mean, this is it's terrible, but I think most parents don't have a choice, right? Most parents are busy working. We don't live in tribal societies anymore where grandma and the aunts and uncles can all raise the kids together. So raising kids is really hard. So we abdicate that to the state. The state turns into a lowest common denominator situation, and the kid ends up bored and compliant, or having, most of their curiosity stamped out of them and just wasting an enormous amount of time. Most of the time spent in school is just completely wasted, and then they use it to build a social life because there's nothing else to do. So I just cannot imagine sending my kids to a regular school. Maybe I'll abdicate, maybe I'll be forced to. So I reserve the right to change my mind, but at least right now I don't think it's the best way to educate them. Obviously, I have the means and I have the time to do otherwise. If you don't have the means and the time, then send your kids to the best school possible, or try to form a local homeschooling group where you can share the burden, or try to live close to your tribe so you can do what you can there. That said, look, I am a product of mostly public schools, including, thank God, magnet schools, which I know are out of fashion now. But so I don't necessarily say that that won't work, but I do get the sense that at least in my time, public schools used to care a lot more about proper education and merit, and much less about being politically correct. So I'm not sure where schools are today, but I hope not to find out.